Inside Rikers Island Prison, world's deadliest inmates and gang secrets exposed. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, because this story will take you deep inside a prison world where secrets bleed into the streets and survival is never guaranteed. The night was heavy with fog as the yellow glow of Rikers Island's floodlights cut across the East River. On the bridge that connects Queens to the prison, a corrections transport van roared past, its sirenless escort a single NYPD cruiser trailing with cold urgency. Inside the van, shackled in chains, sat a 21-year-old man named Luis Spider Delgado. His body was covered in faded gang tattoos, spiderwebs on his elbows, three-point crowns etched into his knuckles, marks that branded him as a member of the Trinitarios, one of New York's most ruthless prison gangs. The van's driver glanced nervously at the rearview mirror. Spider had been arrested on charges of armed robbery and attempted murder in the Bronx. But this wasn't just about another young man caught in a spiral of violence. Spider was whispered to be tied to a broader operation, a hit on a rival Bloods lieutenant that had sent shockwaves through Harlem's underground. Police feared the retaliation would spill into Rikers itself. The gates creaked open as the van entered the compound. Rows of razor wire glistened under the lights. Beyond the barriers rose the jagged concrete silhouette of one of the most infamous jail complexes in America. For decades, Rikers had been a byword for corruption, brutality, and chaos, a place where guards were outnumbered, gangs dictated the rules, and survival meant allegiance to something bigger, darker. As the van pulled into intake, Spider's eyes darted across the yard. He saw groups of men pressed against the fence, some flashing hand signs, others staring silently. In this jungle, Spider knew his tattoos were both his shield and his death sentence. Detective Marissa Vega wasn't supposed to be here that night. Her case files were stacked high back in her Manhattan office, and she was meant to be off duty. But word had reached her unit that Delgado's arrest wasn't just another gang bust. It was a thread leading to a string of unsolved murders tied to smuggled weapons and prison corruption. Vega was tough, sharp-eyed, and known for her refusal to back down from the NYPD's dirtiest cases. She stood in the fluorescent-lit intake corridor, badge clipped to her belt, watching as guards led Delgado past a line of inmates waiting to be processed. The air stank of sweat, bleach, and tension. From behind the glass, she could already feel the currents shifting. Word of Spider's arrival was spreading through the blocks like gasoline awaiting a spark. The Trinitarios would protect him. The Bloods would target him. And the guards? Some would look the other way for a price. By dawn, Rikers was humming with rumors. A slashing in the North Dorm. A guard suspected of running cell phones in exchange for cash. A stash of contraband blades found taped behind a communal toilet. But the most chilling whisper was about Spider himself, that he wasn't just another soldier, but carrying information about a dirty deal involving correctional officers. Detective Vega scribbled in her notebook, piecing fragments together. She'd been chasing a case involving missing weapons shipments tied to gang leaders inside Rikers. Her gut told her Delgado was a pawn in a much larger game. If she could get him to talk, maybe she could break open the cycle of corruption that kept the jail bleeding. But time was against her. That afternoon, as Spider was moved from intake to a dormitory packed with rival sets, two inmates suddenly broke from the crowd. Shouts echoed, metal clanged, and within seconds chaos erupted. Guards wrestled bodies to the floor, sirens wailed, and Vega pushed through the smoke of pepper spray, covering her mouth with her jacket. When the dust cleared, Delgado was alive, barely. A crude shank had sliced his shoulder, and blood pooled across the linoleum floor. The guards dragged him back to isolation. He kept repeating one phrase through clenched teeth. It wasn't supposed to happen yet. That night, Vega couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just a random assault. It was staged. Someone wanted Delgado silenced before he could open his mouth. She pulled the file again, scanning his background: Bronx Street crew, petty robberies, drug sales. Nothing marked him as extraordinary. Yet here he was, nearly killed within hours of entering the most violent jail in America. Her phone buzzed. An anonymous text lit up the screen. Spider isn't who you think. Watch who you trust inside Rikers. Blood will spill. In the dim glow of her office lamp, Vega leaned back, heart pounding. The game had just changed. Delgado wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was a target, and perhaps the key to unraveling a conspiracy running from the cell blocks of Rikers to the highest levels of the city's power. The next morning would bring a discovery that shook her case wide open. A hidden ledger smuggled out of Rikers, packed with names, dates, and dollar amounts, implicating people Vega never thought she'd see in connection to prison gangs. And it was only the beginning. The morning haze rolled over the East River, painting the skyline with muted grays as if the city itself knew secrets were about to surface. Detective Marissa Vega sat in her car outside Rikers Island, coffee cooling untouched in the cup holder. Her eyes kept darting to the small brown envelope resting on the passenger seat. Inside was the ledger, a smuggled document she hadn't yet dared to show her superiors. It had arrived just before dawn, slipped under her office door in a plain folder, no note attached. The paper inside was crude but damning. Pages of handwritten entries, coded symbols, and names Vega recognized immediately. Some were known Trinitario and Blood members, others were less familiar, until she noticed the initials of correctional officers. Dollar amounts sat neatly beside each entry. $300, dorm transfer. $500, phone drop. $1,200, blade delivery. $3,000, silence. And then, at the bottom of one page, an entry that made her chest tighten. Spider 10K/pending. Vega knew what that meant. Delgado wasn't just another inmate being processed through the system. Someone had paid or was about to pay, a staggering sum connected to his name. Was it for protection? Or was it a bounty to make sure he never made it to trial? Inside Rikers, Spider Delgado was being patched up in the infirmary, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale under harsh fluorescent light. He didn't talk much, just stared at the ceiling as guards kept watch. But when Vega was allowed in, his eyes flicked to hers with something between fear and defiance. "You set me up," he hissed. "I'm the only reason you're still breathing," Vega shot back, holding up the folder. "I know about the ledger. I know your name's in it. You think that makes you safe?" Spider's jaw clenched. He turned his head, refusing to speak. Vega leaned in close. "They don't pay 10 grand for silence, Spider. They pay it to erase you." That afternoon, Vega met with Assistant District Attorney Claire Romano, a seasoned prosecutor with a reputation for playing politics as much as she played cases. Vega laid the ledger on the table, watching Romano's manicured fingers flip through the pages. Romano frowned. "If this is real, it's explosive. But do you have any idea how many enemies you'll make bringing this forward? Corrections brass, unions, even City Hall. Nobody wants another Rikers scandal in the headlines." Vega's voice hardened. "This isn't about headlines. It's about gangs running this place like a business, and guards cashing in while inmates bleed." Romano sighed, closing the folder. "If Delgado talks, we have a shot. Without him, this is just paper that can be denied." Vega knew she was right. The ledger was powerful, but it was circumstantial. Spider was the living key, but he was also a target painted in neon red. That night, Vega drove past the Queensboro Bridge, her phone buzzing with an encrypted message from an informant she trusted in the NYPD's gang unit. The message was simple: Blood's planning retaliation. Spider won't make it to trial. Check West Facility. Her heart sank. The West Facility was notorious, a crumbling wing where gang influence was strongest, where guards were fewer and bribes more common. If Delgado was being moved there, it wasn't for his safety. Back inside Rikers, Spider knew his days were numbered. Word traveled fast on the island. The Bloods had put out the order. Anyone who touched him would earn their stripes. The Trinitarios had promised protection, but Spider had seen what protection looked like in Rikers. Favors traded, debts collected, and loyalties that dissolved under pressure. Lying on his bunk in isolation, he thought back to the Bronx streets where it all began. He had joined the gang at 15, thinking the green bandana meant family. But family hadn't saved him when he was arrested. Family hadn't stopped him from being stabbed less than 24 hours after stepping foot in Rikers. Now, with 10 grand on his head, Spider wondered if family would be the one to finish him off. Detective Vega returned to the island the next morning, demanding access to Delgado. The warden, a barrel-chested man named Harold Cray, blocked her path. "He's being transferred," Cray said flatly. "Transferred where?" Vega pressed. "That's classified. Like hell it is. If he's moved to West, you're signing his death warrant." Cray leaned in, lowering his voice. "Detective, you don't know how things work here. Sometimes keeping the peace means letting the sharks eat each other. Delgado's a problem. Maybe it's better if he disappears quietly." Vega's fists clenched at her sides. The stench of corruption wasn't just in the ledger, it was standing right in front of her. By noon, her worst fears came true. Spider was marched across the yard, flanked by 2 guards, his wrists cuffed tight. Inmates pressed against the chain-link fences, shouting, whistling, flashing gang signs. Spider kept his head low, heart hammering. He knew eyes were everywhere. In the West Facility dorm, the air was thick with tension. Dozens of men lounged on bunks, tattoos gleaming, eyes predatory. A guard unshackled Spider and shoved him inside, locking the door behind him. Within seconds, silence fell. Then came the whispers. The Bloods were circling. Spider felt the weight of the bounty on his head, every step echoing in his chest. He spotted a familiar face across the room. Hector Bones Ramirez, a Trinitario lieutenant, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Spider hoped Bones would protect him. But Bones only gave a slow shake of his head. That evening, Detective Vega received a frantic call from an anonymous number. "They're gonna hit Spider tonight," the voice rasped. "You gotta move now. They know about the ledger. They know you have it." Vega froze. If they knew about the ledger, it meant there was a leak in her own circle. Someone close had betrayed her. And if Spider didn't survive the night, the only witness tying the ledger's secrets together would be gone forever. As darkness fell over Rikers Island, the dorm door clicked open. A guard stepped aside, letting in 2 inmates who weren't supposed to be there. The shank glinted faintly in the fluorescent light. Spider backed against the wall, his breath shallow. He had nowhere to run. And then, a deafening alarm blared through the block, red lights flashing, guards flooding in. Someone had pulled the emergency. But was it a rescue? Or a setup? Spider's fate now hung by a thread, and Detective Vega was about to learn the true cost of chasing the truth inside Rikers. Betrayal in the blood. The red lights spun across the dorm, painting the cracked walls of Rikers West in frantic streak. Guards stormed in, batons raised, shouting commands no one listened to. Spider Delgado was pressed into a corner, blood pounding in his ears as 2 attackers lunged at him. The alarm had cut through the chaos, but not fast enough to stop the steel glint of a shank. One of the assailants swung, the blade nicking Spider's ribs. He gasped, clutching his side, and stumbled forward. The second attacker tried to pin him, but the sudden flood of guards scattered the fight. Smoke from pepper spray filled the dorm, men coughing, screaming, clawing at their eyes. Spider dropped to the floor, chest heaving, the blade just inches away from finishing what had started the night before. The guards dragged him out, shackles clanging, his shirt smeared with blood. He was half carried, half dragged through the corridor. Behind the glass, inmates slammed fists against windows, howling like wolves denied their prey. Spider thought he was safe, until he saw the face of the guard holding his chain. It was the same guard who had escorted his transfer earlier. The man leaned down and whispered, "You won't make it out next time." Detective Marissa Vega arrived minutes later, her badge flashing as she fought her way through the throng of correctional officers. "Where is he?" she demanded. No one answered. Finally, she spotted Delgado on a gurney, paramedics checking his wound. "It's shallow," one medic said. "He'll live." Vega leaned close to Spider, her voice sharp but low. "You just survived your second hit in 2 days. You think that's luck? Somebody wants you dead, badly." Spider's lips trembled. "You don't get it, it's not just the Bloods. It's the COs. Some of them, they're worse than the gangs." Vega's stomach twisted. She already suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by an inmate marked for death made the ledger's scribbled numbers feel heavier than ever. That night, Vega drove back into Manhattan, her mind racing. She couldn't trust Rikers' administration. She couldn't trust every cop in her own department. And now, she wasn't even sure she could trust the DA's office. At her apartment, she spread the ledger across her dining table, each page lit by a single desk lamp. She noticed a detail she'd missed before: initials scribbled next to larger transactions. One set of initials, C.R., appeared repeatedly. Vega thought of Warden Harold Cray, his smug warning about letting the sharks eat each other. Was he the one orchestrating it? Or was it someone else entirely? Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. C.R. isn't who you think. Look closer at your own. Her pulse quickened. Was this a trap to mislead her, or a breadcrumb to the truth? The next day, Vega met Romano in a quiet cafe off Lexington Avenue. She slid the ledger across the table, pointing to the C.R. initials. Romano frowned. "You're thinking Cray? He's in the thick of it." "But someone's trying to tell me otherwise," Vega said, her voice low. Romano leaned back, eyes scanning the cafe. "You need to tread carefully. If correctional brass is dirty, they'll bury this. And if someone in your own unit is compromised, you're already in danger." Vega didn't respond. Her gaze had caught something unsettling: a man in a hoodie, sitting alone at the far corner, watching them. When she turned back, the ledger was gone. Romano's hands were empty. The folder had vanished off the table in the span of a heartbeat. Vega bolted up, rushing toward the hoodie, but the man slipped out the cafe door into the crowded street. She shoved past pedestrians, sprinting after him, but by the time she hit the corner, he was gone. The ledger, her only hard evidence, had been stolen. Back at Rikers, Spider Delgado sat in solitary, the bandage around his ribs itching beneath his jumpsuit. He thought about Vega. She had promised him safety, but safety didn't exist here. Not in this place. The door creaked open. A food tray slid through the slot. Spider reached for it, only to notice something taped to the underside, a folded scrap of paper. His heart thumped as he peeled it off and read the jagged handwriting: "Trust no one. Vega included. You are marked." Meanwhile, Vega stormed into the precinct, slamming her badge onto her desk. Her partner, Detective Owen Price, looked up, startled. "You look like hell," Price said. "Somebody stole my evidence," Vega snapped. "In broad daylight. They knew exactly where I was. That means someone fed them my location." Price frowned. "You think it's me?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she shot back. Silence thickened between them. 4 years, Price had been her anchor, a veteran cop with street smarts and loyalty that had carried them through tough cases. But now, with Betrayal circling closer, even he wasn't beyond suspicion. That night, Vega sat in her car outside Rikers again, watching the floodlights cut through the fog. The ledger was gone, her circle was compromised, and Spider Delgado was running out of time. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. Then her phone buzzed once more, another anonymous text. If you want Spider alive, meet me tomorrow, midnight. Queens. Bring no one. Inside his solitary cell, Spider pressed the note into his palm until his knuckles turned white. On the other side of the wall, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, as if someone wanted him to know he was being watched. And then came the sound of keys rattling at his door. Midnight on Hazen Street. Queens at midnight has a way of swallowing sound. The planes coming off LaGuardia rumbled in the distance, but down by the industrial lots near 19th Avenue the air felt padded, like a room waiting for confession. Detective Marissa Vega parked under a busted streetlight, the bulb flickering over a chain-link fence flayed by rust. The text had said, "Come alone." She had. Her service weapon rested against her ribcage like a second heartbeat. A figure stepped from the shadow of a shuttered body shop, palms open, hood low. "You Vega. Talk," she said, keeping the hood of her coat high against the damp. He stayed in the cone of weak light, letting her see the uniform pants before the jacket. Gray, wrinkled, with the crease of a duty belt long since removed. "Name's Carmen Rivas," he said. "CO. Or I was, until I turned in my badge this morning. Personal reasons. That's what they'll say." Vega's fingers tightened on the folder she'd brought, copies of nothing now that the original ledger was gone. "Why me?" "Because I heard you'd risk your career for this. And because they'll eat me alive if I go anywhere near internal affairs. Some of those internal people sell the map." "What do you have?" Rivas glanced down the street, every nerve clearly trained by years of waiting for something ugly to happen. "You think you're C, or is cray. It's not. Convenient, coming from someone with the same initials." "Exactly," he said. "That ledger isn't a ledger. It's a key. A list of initials that don't point at people directly, they point at roles and routes, how product moves, how bodies move, who opens which door. C. R. In most of those entries isn't me, and it isn't the warden. It's a checkpoint court runs." Vega's jaw worked. "Court runs. Every morning before sunrise. Shackles, cuffs, 2 COs and a driver rolling inmates to arraignment. You want someone to disappear without a riot? You don't stab him in the dayroom. You take him on a court run and you lose a chain 4-5 minutes in a blind spot under the bridge." Vega pictured the narrow lanes, the dark undersides of the approach to the island where the asphalt buckled and cameras blinked in and out with the weather. She'd driven it 1,000 times and never seen what she wasn't looking for. "Who signs the runs?" Rivas's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. "Rotates, but the entries you saw connect to a guy named Carlos Ruiz. Sergeant. People call him River. Keeps things flowing. Ruiz. That fits your initials too." "Yeah. Ledger's built to confuse. If you ever got hold of it, you'd think you had a smoking gun on the warden or someone downtown." Meanwhile, the mid-level guys walk. Vega stared at him, weighing the cadence of his voice, the way his eyes cut corners she couldn't see. "Why tell me this?" "Because I pulled the alarm last night," he said softly. "The West hit. It wasn't supposed to be that night, and not in the dorm, but I heard chatter and I jammed the door with a wedge, bought Delgado 60 seconds. That's all I had. You were there. I worked the West Yard rotation." "Worked," he corrected himself. "I've seen things that'd curdle concrete. And I've got a kid starting high school. I can't bring that house down on him, not if I can help it. But I also can't keep watching people get traded like cigarettes." The wind rolled a fast food bag across the cracked asphalt. Vega eased closer, keeping her hands visible. "If court runs are the kill zones, what happens to Delgado?" Rivas swallowed. "They'll move him at dawn. They'll say he's got a medical review at Bellevue. They'll never get that far." "Routes?" Vega asked. "Drivers. 2. Sometimes 3. The keys who signs the escort log. If it's Ruiz plus a floater named Devlin, they'll take the south ramp on and loop the service road. Camera 3 is dead there, been dead for 2 weeks. The island knows. No one fixes it. Vega filed it away, every syllable a chess piece. I need proof. Rivas pulled a cheap phone from his pocket. Burner, scuffed, screen spidered, and flicked through grainy photos. I'm not a spook. But I've got timestamps on escort logs, and I've got a picture of Ruiz's initials next to Spider. 10K, pending. That's your ledger line. Only, here it's on a dry erase board in a sergeant's office, coded as SP, PND 10. You think I don't know what I'm looking at? He held the phone so she could see. Not enough to close a case. Enough to blow one open. Before she could ask for the phone, his gaze jumped to the far end of the block. A sedan rolled slow, lights off until it was too close to be casual. He slid the device into her palm and stepped back. You never saw me, he whispered. And detective? You're looking in the wrong office. The sedan's lights snapped on, blinding. By the time Vega's eyes adjusted, Rivas was gone, swallowed by the scaffolding and shadow. The car crawled past, 2 silhouettes inside, the shape of a wire cage in the back window that screamed unmarked, but not unknown. She turned away, walked to her car like a woman leaving a boring meeting, and didn't breathe until she crossed Astoria Boulevard and the city opened wide again. She drove circles she didn't need, doubling back, counting tail lights that didn't belong to the streets they were on. When she was sure no one hung to her bumper, she pulled under an elevated stretch near Ditmars, parked, and scrolled through the phone's contents. Escort log snapshot. Names. A watermark of the date where the software had stamped each file. And one photo that made her gut go cold. A sheet of paper taped to a metal cabinet, a typed memo she'd seen before, only this one carried a signature. Claire Romano. Ada. The memo was months old, boilerplate language about streamlined coordination between the DA's office and DOC transportation. But at the bottom, handwritten in neat block letters, someone had scrawled Use West Route 3 until further notice. Camera 3 down. There was an initial beside it. A single R. She didn't know if it was Ruiz. She knew it was authorization, and it hung from a memo Claire Romano had signed. Vega thought of the cafe. The vanishing ledger. The way Romano had appraised the room like it was a chessboard and she owned all the pieces. If Delgado talks, we have a shot. She had said that. It had sounded supportive. It had also sounded like a trap being baited. Her phone, her real one, buzzed across the console. A text. Meet? From Owen Price. She stared at his name until it blurred. Owen had been her anchor. Now she didn't know if he was awake. Tomorrow, she typed, then deleted it. Can't. Big break. Will update. She let the lie sit. Back on the island, the night seeped into concrete. Spider Delgado lay on his bunk, awake in the kind of way exhaustion brings, every sense raw, every sound too bright. The footsteps he'd heard earlier had been deliberate, like a baton tapping time on the floor. Now, keys rattled the slot again and a low voice slid through the door. Rise and shine, Spider. He pushed up, every muscle ready to run where there was nowhere to run. Who's that? The flap lifted. Eyes peered in, amused. Friends, the voice said. We're taking you to see the nurse. It's midnight, Spider said. Doc's schedule got flexible, the voice replied. The lock thunked. The door opened. 2 COs stood shoulder to shoulder. The one on the right held a chain like a leash. The one on the left had a jaw that looked like it had been set by a man who didn't care where bones healed. Spider held out his wrists because that's what you do. You pretend the rules are rules until you see whose game it is. They walked him. Down one corridor, then another. Past a sign pointing left for medical, they went right. Past a cluster of cameras with red LEDs burned out. The lights here were older, buzzing through a heartbeat's worth of delay before catching up to themselves. Pipes groaned overhead. The island's skeleton murmuring in iron. "Where we going?" Spider asked. "Court run," the left CO said. "Now." "Judge don't sleep," the CO said, and the other one laughed. It wasn't a laugh that liked jokes. They hit a steel door marked maintenance. The CO with the leash rapped twice, then twice more, a rhythm that made Spider's blood turn to needles. The door opened. Hector Bones Ramirez was inside, hands in his pockets, eyes bored like he was waiting on a bus. Spider stopped moving. Bones tilted his head. "Family meeting," he said. "Come in." The CO tugged the chain. Spider went where he was pulled. The room smelled like dust, old water, and rags. There were mops in one corner and a drain in the middle of the floor. Bones stepped close, too close, and touched the bandage at Spider's ribs with a finger like a promise. "You got me in a spot," he said softly. "I didn't do nothing," Spider said. "Exactly." Bones smiled thin and sad. "You should have done something. Given me a reason to choose you. The way it is? You're a number. And numbers get moved." Spider swallowed. "You going to let the Bloods write our story?" Bones glanced at the COs. "You hear that? He thinks stories get written in here." He looked back at Spider. "They don't. They get priced." The CO who'd kept silent finally spoke, voice flat as a table. "Time." Bones's eyes cooled. "We tried, Spider." He lifted a shoulder. "Somebody wants to balance a ledger. And I like living." Spider's mouth dried. "Who?" Bones's look was pity with no warmth in it. "Wrong question." He nodded to the COs. "Do it clean." The leash jerked. Spider's head hit concrete. He kicked, connected with a shin, got a baton across the calf that lit his leg with sick fire. He sucked air to scream and got a palm over his mouth that smelled like rubber and soap. The other CO pulled a black strip from his pocket, something that looked like tape and felt like night. An alarm screamed. Not in the room, in Spider's skull. He had heard this before, in the West Dorm, when the world tilted and a different future burst through the door. Now the sound was real and distant, a klaxon rupturing the island into pieces. The COs froze. Bones flinched. Somebody on the radio was shouting, codes spilling like marbles. The left CO cursed. "We gotta move." "Finish it," Bones snapped, but he was already backing toward the door, eyes on the hallway like he could see death coming. The right CO yanked Spider up and shoved him through the maintenance door into a service corridor. They ran. Spider's feet skittered on damp concrete, his hands pinwheeling to keep from going down again. The siren blared, and the distant bark of orders ricocheted from the far blocks. They hit a stairwell that stank of bleach. The COs dragged him down flights that didn't count like normal stairs and burst into a cavern of chain link and vehicles. Court Run Garage. Spider had been there once, years ago, in a different life where he'd thought he was a man because older men said so. Vans sat in a neat row like teeth. A roll-up door yawned a mouth at the far end. A third figure waited by a white transport van, engine idling. He wore no nameplate. He had a cap pulled low and a calm that felt like a blade. Ruiz, Spider thought, without needing to see a badge. He couldn't say why. It was in the stillness. It was in the way the others were suddenly smaller. "Load him," the cap said. The left CO shoved Spider into the van, the metal floor ringing under his knees. A chain clattered. The door slammed but didn't latch all the way. The cap reached for it, then paused as his radio hissed. A voice cut through. "All units hold, medical emergency in Northgate, outside agency inbound." "Repeat, outside agency inbound." "Outside agency." Spider didn't know what that meant. He knew the cap's head tilted like a wolf scenting weather. Up above the island, Vega's unmarked slid past the checkpoint with her badge angled just right, her face set to cop on a deadline. She had called no one she trusted. Because she trusted no one. She had flashed her credentials and said, DA Liaison, and used Claire Romano's name like a key she might be breaking off in a lock. She knew if she paused long enough to think about it, she wouldn't move at all. Her phone buzzed once against her thigh. A text from an unknown number, North Gate. Now. She didn't question the timing. She cut the wheel, took the service road Rivas had described, and prayed camera 3's dead I would blink at the exact right moment for the exact wrong people. At North Gate, a crowd had formed. COs with faces slit thin, nurses with clipped hair and clipboards held like shields, a pair of EMTs who looked too clean for the place they were in. Vega parked crooked, badged past a sergeant who wanted to grunt at her and settled for hatred instead. What's the emergency? She asked, steady, boring official. Overdose, someone said without meaning it. Infirmary. Transport. Vega asked. Handled. She didn't move toward the infirmary. She moved where the sergeant didn't want her, peeling off left as if she had been told to peel off left, reading the island's push and pull like current. Down a corridor, down another, the siren's echo fading into a tinnitus that lived under the skin. The smell changed from disinfectant to rubber and oil. She was close. She heard the engine before she saw the van. She heard the clatter of a chain and a curse. She came around the corner fast and quiet and almost ran into the cap. He was half turned toward the roll-up door, radio pressed to his shoulder, attention split. She had her gun out before she knew she was drawing it. NYPD, she said, voice sharp enough to shave metal. Shut it down. The cap's eyes were unreadable and then they were something like amused. Detective, he said. You're in the wrong garage. Open the van, she said. He didn't. He watched her like a man at the edge of a cliff watching a bird decide whether it can really fly. You bring a warrant in that nice coat? The word warrant rolled off his tongue like a joke, like the island was a country with its own weather and laws. The roll-up door word inching upward. Light from the lane outside poured in, a gray ribbon. The van growled forward a foot, then two. Vega took a step, planting herself in the lane of motion. The cap shifted his weight, a small thing, but a thing she trusted in her bones. Stop the van, she said again. Her weapon aimed center mass. Now. From inside the van, a voice, ragged, desperate, not supposed to be heard, tore through the engine noise. Vega. Spider. Everything contracted. The room, the distance, the years she had learned to balance work against the reasons for doing it. The cap's radio hissed. A drone of static rose like insects in August. He lifted his shoulder, the door rolled another 6 inches, and Vega fired once. Not at him, but at the far corner where a red mushroom of emergency stops sat fat and smug. The bullet punched plastic. The roll-up door shuddered and died. Silence fell, that specific kind you only hear after a gunshot. The cap didn't flinch. He looked at the busted emergency stop and then at Vega with the mild curiosity of a man who has seen people do things and end badly for it. That's an unusual tactic, he said. Open the van, Vega said, and for the first time her voice carried something that made even the men who didn't care pause. Not power, certainty. He lifted a hand. The left CO, same jaw, same vacancy, moved around the back and sprang the latch. The door rattled up. Spider was inside on his knees, chain threaded through the floor ring, wrists cuffed, blood drip drying from the bandage that had started clean and would not end that way if she didn't move fast. Out, Vega said. The left CO stepped into the frame like a problem that might be solved by turning away. Vega shifted her aim. Something flickered in the corner of her eye, the second CO moving to her flank, and she pivoted, bringing the barrel to bear. Don't, she said, and meant it so deeply it reached the marrow in the room. Detective, the cap said softly. You don't know what you're in the middle of. I know what you tried to do, she said. I know the route, the dead camera, the court run. I know the initials that keep your hands clean. And I know if I drop my eyes for 1 second he dies. The Cap studied her. The radio on his shoulder spat something urgent, but he didn't answer. He nodded almost imperceptibly to the left CO. Unchain him. The CO hesitated. The nod hardened. Keys rattled. Chain slid. Spider walked backward out of the van like a man stepping out of a mouth. He blinked hard in the shed light and found Vega's face like it was the only true thing left. You good to stand? She asked, never taking her barrel off the Cap. Spider nodded. The muscles in his jaw jumped like he wanted to thanks and couldn't figure out where a word would fit. Now, the Cap said, you're going to holster that weapon and we're going to discuss how you explain discharging a firearm in a DOC facility without a warrant. Sure, Vega said. After we all walked to North Gate together like a happy family. He almost smiled. Detective, you think gates work the way you think they work. Sirens again. Louder. Not the islands. From the lane outside, red and blue bled through the half-open roll-up. More NYPD units than she expected. She hadn't called them. Someone else had. Her stomach dipped. The Cap's radio crackled. All transport hold. DA's office en route. Ada Romano wants the detective contained. Contain. The word settled like ice water down Vega's spine. The Cap's eyes flicked to the open lane, then back to her. Seems your ride's here, he said. ADA wants to have a word. Vega's finger tightened without moving. She imagined Romano stepping through North Gate with a smile that said ally and eyes that said problem. She imagined the cafe again, the ledger vanishing like a coin. Spider leaned toward her, voice low. He's not boss, he whispered, chin flicking toward the Cap. He's a door. Who's the room? Vega asked under her breath. Spider's mouth trembled at its corners. I don't know. But I know a name. The guy who signed me out tonight. It wasn't Ruiz. She understood what he wasn't saying. Say it. He swallowed. Owen Price. The world tilted. It shouldn't have been possible for the floor to move in a place designed to never move. For a heartbeat, Vega thought Spider was lying, buying himself leverage with the only currency he had left. But something about the ragged way he said it, the ghost of disbelief in his own voice, broke her. Her partner's name hung in the exhaust-stained air. Detective Owen Price, the man who had watched her back on too many doors to count. The man who knew every address she forgot and every shortcut she took. The man who had texted meet and made concern sound like weather. Romano en route. Price signing out a court run. The ledger vanishing while Vega sat across from the ADA, like a woman over a trapdoor. Rivas saying you're looking in the wrong office. The Cap cocked his head, like he'd seen a hand play itself. We done? He asked. We're just starting, Vega said, but it sounded like something else, something private and breaking. Boots thudded outside. NYPD flood into a DOC garage always looks like a jagged gear biting something softer. A Sergeant Vega didn't know pushed through with 2 uniforms, eyes irritated, posture pleased. Detective Vega, he called, voice careful. Put the weapon down. ADA Romano's orders. On what grounds? She asked. Interference with a transport, he said. Discharge of a firearm. Saving a witness, she said. Intercepting a murder. We'll sort it out downtown, the sergeant said with the benevolent tone of a man who knows the sorting has already been done. The Cap barely hid his satisfaction. The left CO smirked where he thought she couldn't see. Spider stood between her and the van like a piece of evidence with a pulse, eyes jumping from face to face, finally landing on the door she'd shot. He blinked, and she watched him understand what doors mean. Vega lowered her weapon, not because the sergeant had asked but because she needed her hands for something else now. We're walking out, she said quietly to Spider. You don't run. You don't talk. You breathe and you don't stop. He nodded. They made it 3-step. Then Romano's heels announced themselves like a gavel. Claire Romano appeared in the garage with the kind of grace people mistake for kindness. Her coat hung perfect. Her hair didn't know humidity. Her eyes found Vega's like a laser finds the path it has already cut. "Detective," she said warmly. "What a mess." "Claire," Vega said, and didn't bother with titles, because the time for titles had ended when the memo in the photo carried a signature. Romano took in the van, the COs, the half-open door with the bleeding mushroom of a button, and Spider Delgado with the chain still dragging his ankle like a punctuation mark. "You discharge your weapon in a DOC facility?" she asked, eyebrows high, like a parent looking at broken glass. "Stopped an unlawful transport," Vega said. "Is that what we're calling it?" Romano murmured. Her gaze skimmed the cap. Something unseen passed between them, not recognition, exactly. "Permission. You're coming with me," she told Vega. "We need to talk about procedure and jurisdiction." "And Ruiz," Vega said. Romano smiled like someone had told a joke in another room. "Who?" "Or Devlin. Or whoever's initials are convenient this week." Vega held her eyes. "Or Price." The tiniest of pauses, so brief a lesser watcher would have missed it, pulled at Romano's mouth. "Your partner," she said, bored. "Detective, this is not the time." "It's exactly the time," Vega said. "If he signed a run tonight, I want to see the log." Romano turned to the sergeant. "Get the log," she said, and in the saying of it Vega heard a lie decide what shape it would wear. "Detective," Romano said, returning her focus like a blade returning to its sheath, "you're compromised. You're too close. I can help you if you don't make this worse." The cap's radio crackled. A voice, thin with excitement, broke through. "Confirm, Detective Price cleared west at 040. Escorted medical to North Gate." "Copy." Everyone in the garage heard it. Everyone pretended they heard static. Vega didn't move. Her blood ran cold and clean. The island's concrete sang. Spider swayed and caught himself on the van's lip like he'd stepped into a hole he'd watched them dig. Romano's smile never reached her eyes. "We'll handle it," she said, and the "we" was large and ravenous. Vega stepped forward once, and the sergeant lifted a palm like the stop sign it was. The cap shifted, content. The left CO's mouth gleamed tooth. "Detective," Romano said, voice almost kind, "don't make me put cuffs on you in a DOC garage." Vega looked at Spider. He looked back with the hope people only let themselves feel once. Vega turned to Romano and said softly, "Then we'll do it outside." They moved toward North Gate in a tight, unpleasant cluster, DOC and NYPD and ADA bound by a rope of optic. The night air slid under the door and touched the garage like a promise of a world outside. Vega counted steps and watched angles. The cap fell in behind them, radio hissing something she filed for later. At the threshold, the lights flickered. A surge somewhere. The kind that happens on islands where the bones are old. In that flicker, time loosened just enough for the shape of a man to detach from a pillar and step into the path. Owen Price. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like he'd decided something and hated the decision. "Marissa," he said, and the sound of her name from his mouth in that place was a weapon she hadn't trained herself against. "Tell me you didn't," she said. His jaw worked. His eyes moved to Spider, then past him to Romano, then back to Vega. "We need to talk," he said. "We're done talking," she replied. Romano's voice sliced between them. "Detective Price, appreciate you joining us." "Walk with me," she said, and put a hand on his arm like she owned the muscle underneath. "We need to align." Vega watched his face when the hand landed. She watched the flinch he pretended wasn't there. She took a breath that tasted like old metal and river air and said to Spider without moving her lips, "When I say run, you run to the first marked unit, and you say my name, and you don't stop saying it." He nodded. A half nod. Enough. The gate clicked open. Outside, red and blue painted the wet pavement. The island exhaled. Romano lifted her chin for the cameras she expected or imagined. Owen stood between worlds like a man about to jump, even though he knew the water was shallow. Vega's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, the same cadence as every ghost that had steered her to this moment. He's not the room. She is. Finish this. There was an attachment. A photo. The same memo as before, Romano's signature. But this one carried the rest of the margin note cut off in the first snap. Not just camera 3 down. The line below, maintain outage, clean lane for court diversions. Initials, C. R. Vega lifted her eyes to Romano, to the smile that had always been a knife. The twist didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. Detective Vega, Romano said brightly for anyone who might be watching, let's clear this up. Vega stepped into the night with Spider at her shoulder, the cap behind them, Owen to the side, and a story that had finally decided to show its author. Somewhere above, another plane lifted from LaGuardia, dragging a line of sound across the black. Rikers held its breath. And then everything happened at once. The last door. The night air outside North Gate was raw, damp, and humming with red and blue pulses that washed over the faces of every cop, guard, and official standing there. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but Vega could feel them circling like sharks. If this broke, the city would feast. If it didn't, the story would vanish into the gray walls of Rikers forever. Spider Delgado stood at her side, trembling but upright, his wrists still cuffed, the chain clinking against the pavement like punctuation marks he couldn't control. The cap stood behind them, silent, radiating authority without needing to speak. Romano was poised as ever, her coat gleaming under the floodlights, her lips curved in a smile meant for cameras, though none were yet here. And Owen Price, her partner, her brother-in-arms, the one man she had trusted above all others, stood across from her, his eyes heavy, as though every decision he'd ever made had led him here. Vega held up her phone, thumb hovering above the damning photo. Claire Romano, she said loudly enough for everyone gathered to hear. Assistant District Attorney. Your initials. Your signature. Your note to keep the camera dead so these diversions could happen. You're not cleaning up corruption, you're running it. Romano didn't flinch. She took a step forward, her heels clicking like a metronome. Detective Vega is unstable, she said smoothly, turning to the gathered officers. She's fired her weapon inside a facility without cause. She's fraternizing with known gang members. And now she's peddling doctored photos from anonymous sources. Do you want to hang your careers on that? The sergeant by the gate hesitated. The CO's shifted uneasily. The cap's jaw flexed but his eyes stayed neutral, unreadable. Vega raised her voice. Every inmate moved under your orders, Romano, every slashing, every disappearance, it's in that ledger. The one you thought you erased. Delgado lived long enough to confirm it. You tried to silence him twice. You won't do it again. She turned to Owen. And you, tell me the truth. Did you sign him out tonight? Owen's face was pale under the flashing lights. His mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. Marissa, he whispered, not looking at Romano, not looking at the cap, just at her. You were never supposed to see this side of it. Her chest tightened. You? You helped her. I helped us, Owen said, his voice breaking. You don't understand. The gangs don't just run Rikers anymore. They run half the city. Romano, she's the only one who can keep the blood from spilling into the street. Without her, everything burns. Romano placed a hand on his arm, like a queen consoling her knight. Detective Price has been a valuable ally. He knows stability sometimes means sacrifice. Spider spat on the ground. Stability? You call this stability? People are dying in there every day, and you're counting the bodies like coins. The standoff stretched, the sirens' wails in the distance harmonizing with the silence of those gathered at the gate. Then, suddenly, Spider lunged forward. "Ask her," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Ask her why the Bloods put 10 grand on me when I'm Trinitario. Ask her who ordered it." All eyes swung to Romano. For the first time, her expression flickered. Vega pressed. "Say it. Say why Delgado was marked." Romano's voice came sharp, almost involuntary, because he was going to talk about the weapons shipments, about the containers at Hunts Point. Because if he opened his mouth, every alliance collapses. The words hung in the night air like smoke. She realized too late she'd said too much. The cap's eyes narrowed. The sergeant's head jerked as if replaying her words. Phones were out now, some recording, others pretending not to. Vega moved fast. She pulled Spider forward, raising her voice. "You all heard it. Direct admission. The ADA is complicit in running contraband through this city, using Rikers as a hub, using gang blood as currency." Romano turned cold, her mask snapping back into place. "Arrest her," she commanded, pointing at Vega. But no one moved. Owen stepped forward, his hand twitching near his holster. "Marissa, don't do this," he begged. "You don't know how deep it goes." Vega's voice cracked with fury and grief. "Then tell me, Owen. Tell me how many names you signed off on. How many bodies you pushed into silence." His silence was louder than a gunshot. The cap finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through. "I don't work for you," he said to Romano. "Never did. I work for the island. And the island just heard you confess." Romano's face blanched. She turned to the COs, but none stepped forward. The sergeant's radio crackled with dispatch chatter about media inbound and command review. The city was coming. This wouldn't stay buried. Romano's eyes sharpened. "Fine," she hissed, reaching into her coat. For a split second, Vega thought she was drawing a weapon. She raised her gun instinctively, but Romano only pulled out her phone, thumb slashing across the screen. "Then let the city burn," she muttered, hitting send. Owen's eyes widened. "What did you do?" Romano smirked. "Pulled the plug. Every alliance, every truce, it collapses tonight." Vega lunged, slapping the phone from her hand. It clattered across the wet pavement. Spider kicked it into the gutter. The screen spidered dead. But the damage was done. Calls were already being made, messages already sent. The island was about to erupt. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Vega raised her voice, steady, commanding. "Get her in cuffs," she told the sergeant. "You've all got body cams. You heard the confession. Do your job." The sergeant hesitated, then nodded. Romano's arms were twisted behind her, her furious protests echoing into the night. Owen stood frozen, torn between every loyalty he had ever known. Vega turned to him, her voice raw. "You chose her. That's on you. But I'm done covering for you." Spider Delgado looked at Vega with something she hadn't seen in his eyes before, not just fear, but faith. "So what now?" he asked. Vega scanned the night sky, sirens converging from every direction. "Now," she said. "Now the island burns clean. Or it burns us all." The gate clanged shut behind them as Romano was led away. Vega gripped Spider's shoulder, steadying him. The floodlights glared, harsh and unforgiving, but the darkness beyond felt heavier still. Because Rikers wasn't just a jail. It was a wound in the city, and wounds don't heal just because you cut out the infection. They scar. They remind. They bleed again. And as Vega walked into the storm of flashing lights, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the start of a war.